Hi everyone, it's Dan, and I'm here with a new series on endgames in chess. And endgames in chess are pretty complex. There are entire books written about the kind of tactics and strategies that are needed for both sides, depending on the positions, how many pieces are left, etc. In this video, and actually this is going to be the first in a very short series of 3 videos, I'm going to be looking at perhaps the simplest kind of endgame, which is just the single pawn endgame. So we're going to be looking at positions where, in these examples, it's going to be white is going to have an extra pawn, and we're going to try to look and see how white can promote the pawn and how black can try to stop white from promoting the pawn. In certain positions, it will be the case where, for example, if white plays correctly, black will not be able to stop white from promoting the pawn, or the inverse, if black plays correctly, white will not be able to promote the pawn no matter what white does. But it is important to know those techniques, and that's going to be the focus of these next 3 videos. This video, however, is just going to introduce 2 very simple concepts that are going to be very important in the next 2 videos looking at single pawn endgames and also just in endgames in general. These 2 concepts are going to help immensely in your calculation and your focus in playing the endgame in chess. So the very first concept that we're going to look at is opposition. And if you look at the board right now, I've stripped it down to just the kings, and you'll notice that the kings are directly across from each other. And so they are said to be in opposition. Now, opposition basically means that if you have the opposition, your opponent will not be able to make progress. If you are forced to yield the opposition, you will not be able to make progress. Your opponent will always be able to stop you from making progress with your king. So what does that look like? So let's say in this position it is white's turn to move. So let's say white plays to d3. All black needs to do is play to d5. And again, if we back up, here black has the opposition because it's white's turn, so white must make a move. White cannot move to d4, e4, f4. Basically, the king can't get to the 4th rank. And so if he moves over, he's breaking the opposition, and black now takes the opposition again with king to d5. If white tries to move over again, black moves and takes the opposition again. As we can see, white here, no matter what he does, is not going to be able to make any progress. He can try going back the other direction. He can even move backwards, which is actually going to be worse, because after the king plays to e4, now you'll see that the white king is cut off from even the 3rd rank. And so this is opposition. Opposition can even exist when the kings are not directly across from each other. So in this example here, I have the kings on d1 and d7. The important thing to note is that there are an odd number of ranks in between them, and that both kings are on the same color square. If this is the case, you can still look and see who has the opposition, and just like before, it depends on whose turn it is. Just to illustrate this point very quickly, let's say white moves king to d2, black needs to move to d6, and after king d3, king d5, it's very clear here that now it's white's turn. White has to yield the opposition, which means black has the opposition. White is not going to be able to make any more progress with his king in this game. Opposition can even exist along a diagonal. So in this example here, the kings are on the same diagonal, the a1 to h8 diagonal, and once again there are 5 squares in between them. There are an uneven number of squares in between them. And so if it's white's turn, we can say that black here has the opposition, because after white makes his move, black is going to be able to move, and we'll see at the end that black is going to be able to take the opposition no matter what white does. So king b2, king f6, the kings are getting close to each other, and now pretty much no matter where white goes, black is going to be able to make a move to get into opposition. So we've already looked at opposition along a rank. Now let's look at opposition along a file. So let's say white here plays to c4. Well, all black needs to do in order to take the opposition is move the king to e4. And once again, no matter what white does, black is always going to be in a position to take the opposition. Even if the white king moves backwards, once again, black is going to be able to move and cut the king off and push the king farther and farther away from the center of the board. So that's basically a very brief explanation of what opposition is, how it works. As you can see, it's very important to have the opposition, which means it's important to be opposite your opponent's king, but have it be your opponent's turn, because then he or she is going to have to yield the opposition and you will be able to make progress. This is going to be a very important concept that we're going to come back to when we're looking at how white is going to be able to promote its lone pawn and how black is going to be able to stop the pawn from promoting. So we'll come back to those in the next couple of videos. Okay, the next very simple endgame position that we're going to look at in this single pawn endgame is the rule of the square. And basically this is going to be a very quick calculation tool that anybody is going to be able to use to see if a single pawn will be able to promote from anywhere on the board without the help of its king. So in this position, I've tucked the white king as far away from its own pawn as it can possibly get on h1, and so the white king is not going to be able to help the pawn promote pretty much no matter what. So it's going to be up to the pawn to try to get to a8 and become a queen all by itself. Now, what you could do is just count the number of moves that the pawn is going to have to make, and then count the number of moves that the king is going to have to make and see who's going to win that foot race. And you could count, and that would work. But that's not exactly the most efficient way to figure out if a pawn is going to be able to promote. And especially if you're crunched for time, like if you're playing a blitz game or even a bullet game, and you just don't have the time to count. This nifty little trick will be able to help you out, and you'll be able to tell instantly if the pawn is going to be able to promote, or if you're going to need to try to maneuver your king into position to help your pawn promote to the other side of the board. So the rule of the square is you start with the square that the pawn is on. So in this case, it's a4. And you draw a diagonal to the rank that the pawn is trying to get to promote. Now I'm not going to highlight the squares because you can't highlight them in a real game, so this is going to be a little thought exercise. So you draw the diagonal a4 to e8 since the pawn is trying to get to the 8th rank to promote. And then using a4, e8, a8 as 3 corners of your square, you can probably guess the 4th corner is going to be e4. So you're going to have the square a4, a8, e8, e4. If the black king at any point can get into that square, the black king will be able to stop the pawn from promoting. The pawn will be captured. If black is not able to get into that square, then the pawn will be able to promote no matter what black does. And obviously this only holds for a position where, say, there isn't a bishop or a rook or a knight or some other piece that could capture the pawn. Obviously, if there are other pieces on the board, the rule of the square is probably not going to be applicable. But just to illustrate what this means, so if we draw this square a4, a8, e8, e4, you can see that even if it's black's turn, black is not going to be able to get into the square. Just really quick, assuming it's white's turn, well, this is obviously going to be a win because the white pawn pushes, and we have a queen, and white wins the game. But if we back up here, let's say that now it is black's turn. Well, black is going to obviously try to get the king as close to the pawn as possible, and so he's going to move to f8. But if we keep in mind the square is a4, a8, e8, e4, we can see that black is not in that square. Right? It's enough for black to be able to get onto the edge of the square, but black can't even do that in this position. And so the pawn's going to push forward, and now we have to redraw the square. Right? Now it's no longer a4, a8, e8, e4. It's going to be a5, a8, d8, d5. The square is going to get smaller. And so black is simply going to be one move short and is not going to be able to stop the pawn from promoting. So now let's put the black king on f8, and let's say that it is black's turn. So we still have the pawn on a4, so we still have our square a4, a8, e8, e4. But if it's black's turn, black is in fact going to be able to get inside the square. As I just said, it's enough to be on the edge of the square. You don't have to be in the middle of it. And so the pawn is not going to be able to promote without the assistance of the king. And so this is going to be a draw. It's black's turn here. Black is obviously just going to take the queen, and then the game will be a draw. So there is going to be one caveat in applying the rule of the square to figure out if the pawn is going to be able to promote. And that is going to be if the pawn in question has yet to move. As we all know, pawns on their very first turn in chess can move 2 squares if they so choose. Assuming that this pawn wants to promote as quickly as possible, it's going to move 2 squares. And so even though in this position, if we draw our square, the pawn starts on a2, we draw up to the 8th rank, which brings us to g8, and so we have the square a2, a8, g8, g2. Even though it looks like black is very obviously in that square, we have to remember that the pawn is not going to move 1 square, the pawn is going to move 2 squares. And so what we really need to do is draw the square from a3. We have to move in our mind the pawn up 1 square to a3 and then draw that square. And if we do that, we end up with the square a3, a8, f8, f3. And from there, we have to figure out, is black going to be able to get into the square? And obviously, that is going to depend on whose turn it is. So if the pawn pushes forward, it's white's turn first. We will see that even though it looked like the king was in the square, really he wasn't. And so black is going to lose this game. However, if we back up to the starting position, and we assume that now it is black's turn to move, well, again, we draw the square, moving the pawn 1 square forward in our mind to a3, and so we have a3, a8, f8, f3. And if it's black's turn to move, black is able to get into that square. So even though the pawn's going to have a little bit of a head start on that very first move, white is still going to turn out a turn short, and this is going to be a draw. So that's actually going to do it for this video. That's all I really wanted to cover, is those 2 very important endgame concepts, opposition and the rule of the square. We will come back to both of those concepts later on in this little mini-series. There are going to be 2 videos left, and we'll see that opposition, as I said before, is going to be very important, so you really got to know that. But before I end this video, I am going to throw up a couple of rule of square puzzles. So basically, there'll be a position, and one side will have an extra pawn. It might be white, it might be black, and what you will have to do is use the rule of the square to calculate whether or not the pawn will be able to promote before the enemy king captures it. Now, I'm not going to actually provide any commentary for these. I'm just going to show you the positions, and you can, I'll show you the positions. You can pause the video if you need to, and then I'll just move the pieces, and it'll be pretty self-explanatory. So I'm not going to be speaking anymore for this video. So, but definitely leave me a comment. Let me know how you did. I hope this was helpful to you, and I really hope that you finish watching the rest of the series. I'm really looking forward to studying more of the endgame and sharing it with everybody here. The endgame is something that I've struggled with. There have been so many games where I felt I really should have had the win, and something happened and I either lost or I was not able to secure the win, and I ended up drawing. And so endgames are obviously very, very important. As I learn more about endgames, I will definitely be sharing it on my YouTube channel here with everybody who cares to watch. So I hope you watch the rest of the videos. I hope you stay tuned as I do more endgame videos, and I hope this was helpful. Please feel free to leave a question or comment, and take care. Thanks for watching. Bye.